Hello everybody, thank you for joining me today, and in today's video we're going to be looking at how to approach histology at medical school. So histology is one of the subjects in medical school which I would say is very similar to Marmite. So some students enjoy it, other students don't enjoy it at all, but regardless of how you feel about histology is something that you do need to know as a medical student because it is examinable in both the OSCEs and in written exam papers. So histology, for students who are unsure, is essentially the art or the science of looking at pieces of human tissue under the microscope, being able to identify the structures and relating that to its function. So essentially histology just helps to reinforce your anatomy knowledge. So let's get started. So the Medicine Guide is a YouTube channel with free online videos which helps to support medical students throughout their entire journey at medical school. So I've made videos such as how to be successful during the pre-clinical and the clinical years at medical school. I've got videos focusing on the high yield paediatric conditions that crop up in medical school final exams. I've got videos that target the high yield topics that crop up for obs and gynae, the high yield topics for cardiology in medical school finals, and high yield imaging for medical school finals. And this video, in conjunction with others, is aimed to support medical students when they are tackling anatomy, CBL teaching, histology and PBL teaching. So if you enjoy my videos today, please can I ask you to like my video, subscribe to my YouTube channel and share with your friends. So without much further ado, let's get started. So the outline of today's video is that I'm going to discuss how histology is taught at medical school, how histology is assessed at medical school. I'll be giving top tips for approaching histology sessions, and I'll also be signposting you to resources that I found useful when I was learning about histology. So let's begin. So you're probably wondering at this stage, how is histology taught at medical school? So like I mentioned previously, histology is taught at medical school in conjunction with anatomy. So if your anatomy session earlier this week was focused on renal anatomy, so that's looking at the anatomy concerning the kidneys, then it's very likely that your histology session will follow on the same theme. So in histology, you might be focusing on a bit more detail on nephrons themselves. So the nephron is a unit which helps to make up the kidney and is adapted to meet the kidney structure and function. So in histology, you'll be focusing more on the structure of the nephron unit itself, focusing in a lot of detail on the Bowman's capsule and the glomerulus. And you'll be looking at these structures under the microscope, and hopefully with time you'll be able to identify these structures under the microscope. You'll be able to draw out these structures onto a piece of paper after looking at it under the microscope, and you'll be able to label your diagram that you've drawn. So really, histology is a subject which helps to reinforce your understanding of anatomy, and the key focus in histology is to relate how structures within the organ themselves are adapted to meet the organ's structure and function. So for this example, we'll be looking at how the nephron, the Bowman's capsule, the glomerulus are structures within the kidney's architecture which are focused on helping the kidney to meet its structure and function and how it's adapted to do so. And that's the key element of histology, relating structure and function. Now, histology is a double-edged sword. It is assessed in both the medical school exam papers and as an OSCE station. So as a component of the exam paper, perhaps you might be asked an SBA about what particular structures and features are found within a specific type of tissue, or perhaps you might have a picture of some particular type of tissue under the microscope and you'll be expected to label it or identify key features of that tissue. And similarly for your OSCEs, you will be, I imagine, if your OSCE stations are anything like mine, you will be asked to set up a microscope from scratch, and you'll have to look at a tissue under the microscope, draw a labelled diagram based on what you can see from under the microscope, and then answer questions related to the structure and function. So hopefully from this you'll appreciate just how histology interlinks with anatomy, and if you understand anatomy well, then hopefully histology will aim to boost your understanding even more and help to reinforce your understanding even more. So now we'll look at some top tips that you can use to help you be more successful when you're approaching your histology sessions. So I've separated this into before, during and after. So starting off with before, so before you've even walked into histology, so a few days before you're due to have histology, it's important that you look at your notes from your most recent anatomy session and just try to refresh yourself over what you've covered in anatomy, because it's very likely that whatever you covered in anatomy a few days ago, you will reinforce your learning by covering a similar topic in histology. So like I mentioned right at the beginning of the video, that if you've looked at kidney anatomy on Monday, it's very likely that on the Wednesday, Thursday, when you have your histology session, that you'll be looking at the structure and the function of nephrons, for instance, under the microscope, as an example. And also, if you have access to what your histology session is for the coming week, it's important that you briefly familiarise yourself with the topic. So if it is looking at potentially muscle tissue under the microscope, make sure that you're familiar with muscle structure, make sure that you're familiar with muscle anatomy, and just really try to refresh yourself as much as you can, because this will put you in a better place and help you hopefully understand the histology session far greater. Now, during the histology session, it sounds a little bit strange, but please do try to actively listen. And by that I mean try to answer the questions if you can. If you're unsure of something, then please ask for help. Please reference in the histology textbooks. Also, I would say it's important that you take notes during histology sessions, and the best way to do that is to jot down on your notepad any key information that the tutors have said. And with histology, it's also important to understand, I know I've mentioned this before, but relating structure and function. So if you can find a good diagram about certain structures for that particular tissue type that you're looking at, it'd be a good idea to help make a note of that in your notes, and then later on in the week when you're writing up your histology notes neatly, then you can always go back and reference that particular diagram. And also I would say that use your histology session, so when you're actually in the lab and you've got the microscope, to practice setting up the microscope, because that's something you'll be expected to do in your OSCEs, and also practice drawing the structures that you can see under the microscope, and also practice labelling them, because that's what will get you the marks, not your Picasso interpretation of whatever's under the microscope. That's not the important thing. The important thing is being able to draw a rough diagram, but the labelling is what's really going to differentiate the good candidates from the not so good candidates. And after histology, I would say that it's really important that you complete your histology notes. So I would strongly recommend that you make your histology notes using either PowerPoint slides or Word document. Personally, I think PowerPoint slides are better for histology notes, and it's important that you are able to find diagrams or pictures of what certain tissues would look like under the microscope, and you make sure that you've got copies of that in your notes, because like I said, it's very likely that in the knowledge exam paper you'll be given a tissue and you'll have to identify that tissue and identify key structures within that tissue. So the more images that you see and the more images that you become familiar of different tissues, then that will put you in a better and stronger position. And finally, I would say that it's important to consolidate your knowledge. So what I think is good is that if you can embed your histology notes within your anatomy notes, so potentially if you've got one book that you use for anatomy, or if you've got one online PowerPoint presentation that you've used this week for your kidney notes, then I would add on your histology notes to that. So when it comes to revision time for exams, hopefully when you're revising your renal anatomy, because your renal histology notes are a continuation of the page, then you'll be revising and recapping your renal histology at the same time. And because you've already covered the renal anatomy, the histology will just make far much more sense more quickly. And to consolidate your knowledge, you can use Quizlet, and I've mentioned that before. It's an online free website that you can use, and I believe it also has a mobile app as well. And you can create flashcards using Quizlet, or if you want, you can print out pictures of what different tissues look like under the microscope and glue that onto a bit of card and use that for flashcards as well. The key thing in histology is being able to recognise different tissue types and structures and relating that to their function. So in my previous video on how to be successful in the preclinical years at medical school, I've discussed all the different resources that I used in my preclinical years, and I've also mentioned histology resources. Now, the only book that I really found useful for histology was Netter's Essential Histology. I think it's really good because it has pictures of the tissue type under the microscope, and then it's got labelled sort of hand-drawn diagrams on the side. So I thought that was the best book that I came across. If anyone else is watching this video and they think that there's a better book instead of histology, then please do post in the comments section below. But this was the book that I found most useful. So hopefully you found this video helpful today. Please could I ask you to kindly like my video, subscribe to my channel and share my video with your friends. Thank you for watching this video today, and I wish you all the best with your exams.